Welcome back to my channel, guys. We decided to change things around today. Why not? We are working late, filming late, and we switched your periphery. We are now facing the staircase rather than the sofa. I want to know if you guys like this better or the sofa look. Please sound off. It's important because I know that the background always matters. All right, I can't wait to hear which one you prefer. Today, I want to talk about interior design rules you should not break, ever. I'm not talking about doing this in this crazy, rigid textbook way and not the obvious rules you hear all the time. This is going to be about the quieter rules that a lot of interior designers keep close to their hearts and they don't share. But on this channel, we do not keep secrets. We do not gatekeep because I want every single one of you out there to have the same design ethos that all the professionals have and all the people with great taste have, because why not? We need to share the wealth. The ones that shape how a room actually holds itself together, even when no one can quite explain why it feels right or wrong. That is the advice that we'll be getting today. So these are rules I rely on as a luxury interior designer, not because they're trendy or prescriptive, but because I've seen what happens when they are ignored. And I see it on the daily. So I want to make sure none of you guys are doing this, and I'm sure you're not, but let's go into it and refine our tastes and our designs a little bit more. So what I want to do in this video, in fact, is walk you through how I think about these rules while I'm designing a space. Not as a checklist, but as a way of reading a room as decisions start stacking on top of one another. And if you stay until the very end, I will share the mental shift that, in my experience, completely changes how people approach designing their own homes. If you're someone who actually wants to understand design, not just copy rooms or follow trends, but really learn how to think like a designer, then I urge you to subscribe. This channel is where I break down how rooms work, why certain decisions last, and how to design spaces that feel calm and intentional. And that's what I've been doing for the last 5 years and why we've amassed over 120, 130,000 followers. And you guys, let's make our community bigger and better. So if you haven't subscribed yet, this is my plea to you. Okay, so let's start with where my brain usually goes first when I walk into a space. It's not furniture, it's not color, it's materials. So rule number one, don't introduce a new material unless it appears at least twice. So when I walk into a space, the first thing I register is truly the material. Not consciously, it's more of a feeling. So I can usually tell within a few minutes whether a room feels cohesive or fragmented, and almost always the answer is in the materials. So one of the most common issues and mistakes that I see is a material appearing once and never again in a home. For example, a living room with a beautiful stone side table, but no other stone anywhere else in the space, or maybe a brass floor lamp, but no other metal that is apparent anywhere else. So what happens is that the material feels sort of isolated and it almost feels like a mistake. So even though it might be a gorgeous piece, it doesn't belong to the room yet. So when I introduce a material, I'm already thinking ahead. I'm asking myself, where else could this show up naturally? So not in a matchy way, of course, and not in an obvious way either. It's about subtleness. So maybe it's a small tray, maybe it's the base of a lamp, maybe it's a subtle detail in another zone. So you really want to have continuity of materials. The point isn't duplication, it's integration. And the second appearance is what allows the material to become part of the room structure instead of a decorative moment. So if you've got a very fancy, voluminous velvet sofa, well, velvet needs to appear somewhere, somehow, back in the room. And it doesn't have to be another large, voluminous piece, but it could be, some bolster, or it could be a little round pillow, or it could be a throw pillow on the floor, which I love doing, by the way. If you're looking at your own space and something feels unresolved, I'd ask, is there any material that only shows up once? If the answer is yes, that's often a good place to start. Once materials are doing their job, the next thing I am observing is, can you guys guess it? Probably not, because who knows, maybe you have, is scale. but specifically hierarchy. So rule number 2, chairs should never be the same scale as the table they surround. What I mean by that is, although hierarchy sounds formal, it's really a simple question. Who's in charge here? As you guys know, I'm always in charge. So when I'm in a room, I stand out. And when you guys in your own rooms, you stand out. I digressed and wanted to have a little fun here. But every room needs a leader in terms of furniture, something that sets the tone and gives the rest of the pieces permission to relax. So imagine you have a crazy ornate dining room with a table that has a crazy glossy burl wood. Wait, I just described my own dining table. Well, I'm not going to bring some over-the-top chairs because the table itself with the burl wood and the brass accents and everything else, which we're going to pop in here, has huge visual weight, and its presence is very much known, and it's anchored. So this is how you know this room is done correctly, because it has a leader. Dining rooms are the easiest place to see this. So just as I mentioned, if the table and the chairs are the same visual weight, same thickness, same presence, the room feels flat. Nothing anchors it. In higher end interiors, the table almost always carries more authority. It has a heavier top, a stronger base, more visual gravity. The chairs do matter, of course, but they support the table rather than compete with it. The same logic applies everywhere. In a living room, the sofa should usually lead. In a bedroom, it's the bed. Sometimes it's the largest piece in the room, which is obvious, but sometimes not. If you have side chairs that feel louder than the sofa or nightstands that feel more dominant than the bed, the hierarchy is off. Rooms feel calmer when one piece clearly sets the tone and the other elements are like supporting actors and actresses. And this is where I want to talk about scale more broadly, because this comes up constantly. People will say, I like everything in the room, but something feels off. Have you guys said that to yourselves? I bet you have. And the reason for that is that there is something wrong with the scale of the furniture. Rule number 3, when something feels off, look at size first. This is one of the most important things to understand. When someone says, I like everything in the room, but it still feels off, my instinct is not to add anything. In fact, it is to look at the scale and sometimes take away things. Most often, pieces are simply just too cautious. A rug that stops short of the seating area, artwork that feels polite instead of confident, a light fixture that's technically works but doesn't anchor the ceiling. I always imagine the same piece but larger. What would this room feel like if the rug were extended further? What if the art had more presence? What if it was bigger or it had more bold colors? If the light held the space instead of just filling it? Rooms settle when scale feels generous. So smallness introduces hesitation, and hesitation shows up emotionally, even if you can't articulate why. If you're choosing between 2 sizes and one feels slightly bold, that's usually the right choice. Go with your instinct. I find that when we get on a phone call together one-on-one through my Zoom consultations, that you guys have really good instinct. I am shocked at how good you guys are as secret interior designers yourselves. So as I mentioned, we do have one-on-one consultations by clicking the Zoom in the description section below, where you and I can get on a call and I can help you with any of your interior design dilemmas. A lot of times you guys think that you need new furniture, but in reality, you just need clarity. You need someone to say, this piece is right, but it's not doing enough work for the room, or this decision is breaking the hierarchy, or maybe you should swap out the larger piece for a piece that's a little bit more subtle if you want to keep, for instance, a set of chairs that have a little bit more presence. If you're working on a space and you feel stuck in any way, as you guys know, you can certainly book the one-on-one design consultation, and I'll leave the link again in the description section. Now, back to the room. The next thing I think about is how the room is holding itself together. Not visually matching, that's different. I'm thinking about cohesion. Rule number 4, repeat finishes, not objects. So when a room feels disjointed, people often try to fix it by matching things. So for example, 2 identical lamps, repeated decor pieces. That's not what creates cohesion. That's just very boring cut and paste interior design, which is actually not great. Cohesion comes from material repetition, not object repetition. So I want finishes to echo across the space quietly. If there's a warm brass tone, I'll let that show up again. Perhaps it's in a lamp, later in a decorative object. It's not going to be in every lamp, if that makes sense. If there's a certain wood tone, it should feel intentional and not isolated. By the way, I always say this, and people always ask me, can I mix my finishes? Yes. Can I mix my wood tones? This is a question I've been getting recently quite a bit. Yes, you can have walnut floors and white oak furniture, or vice versa. You can have walnut furniture and white oak floors. There is no reason why you can't do that. In fact, some of the best designers in the world, Architectural Digest designers, such as myself, if I may say, will definitely do that. So don't be afraid. You can mix vintage, you can mix contemporary, you can mix two periods together. In fact, some of the best interior designs that I have seen, and I have seen many and study many of them and look at many of them obsessively, have the perfect mix of vintage and new. Now, something else you can do is you can mix sculptural and simple. The finishes become the through line that holds everything together. Now, this is where restraint really starts to matter. And this is where rule number 5 is very important. One statement per area. Guys, I always tell this to my clients. If you love polished brass, perhaps you have a giant polished brass mirror that's very intricate and ornate and you just love it. I will love it too for you. In fact, I would love it myself, but that's it. That's the one crazy piece you can have in the room. You can't have more than one crazy piece. I want to clarify something here because this is often, misunderstood. I love strong pieces. I love furniture with presence. I even love Rococo furniture as long as there's only one. I love pieces that feel architectural, sculptural, even slightly demanding. What I'm not interested in is competition without structure. When I'm designing a room, I'm not thinking, how do I make this quieter? I'm thinking, which piece is carrying the weight of this space? Because a great piece needs room to do its job. If you put multiple high-impact pieces in the same area without hierarchy, they don't elevate each other. In fact, they cancel each other out. Just like when we were putting X's in algebra. Is that algebra? I don't know why I'm being crazy today. So instead of thinking only one statement, I think in terms of one primary anchor. In a living room, that might be a deeply structural sofa, something with real mass. It could be an incredibly interesting 3-tier coffee table, for example. It doesn't just have to be the sofa. It could be a beautiful statue that just takes over the space. Once that anchor is established, I actually want other interesting pieces, but they need to be complementary. They need to have a relationship with it. They can be sculptural but lighter. They can be expressive but quieter. Distinct but not competing for authority. It's the difference between a room that feels curated and one that feels like a collection of strong opinions, all talking at once. Great pieces don't need reinforcement. They need support. And when a room is designed this way, those pieces feel intentional, confident, and fully resolved, not performative. And this is usually where people start to worry they're doing too little. This brings me to rule number 6. Let some things be plain. For crying out loud, guys, this is the one time where we can pick something that's inexpensive and plain and have a good time with it. This is one of the ideas that takes time to really believe in. I have to beg some of my clients to believe in doing something very, very simple. They think, well, I'm doing something, I'm redesigning this whole house, I'm spending all this money, and I pick a very simple piece, and they're like, but this is so boring. I'm like, if everything is jazzy, then you live in Neverland, right? So when you're designing your own space, especially if you love beautiful objects, it can feel almost irresponsible to choose something plain. But there is this quiet pressure to justify every piece, to make sure everything is interesting, to feel like nothing is wasted. But in practice, plain pieces are doing some of the most important work in a room. When I'm designing, I'm very aware of how much visual information the room is already holding, and I'll intentionally choose pieces that don't ask for a lot of attention. A simple side table, a quiet rug, a chair with a very straightforward silhouette. For example, if you have a very ornate, beautiful Persian rug, which I would love, well, I can't start putting a lot of ornate items on it or it looks like the Taj Mahal. And guys, last time I checked, none of us own the Taj Mahal. So it's really truly because a room needs a place to rest. I think of these pieces that are quiet that are plain, almost like punctuation. They slow the eye down. They give shape to the more architectural, sculptural elements, and they really elevate the space. Why? This is one of the reasons I always throw in very, very, very high-end homes with big budgets, a sisal rug from Amazon. People are like, what? Well, without the simple sisal rug, the beautiful, gorgeous, ornate, structural chair means nothing. Without them, even strong rooms start to feel restless. Not obviously cluttered, just busy in a way that's hard to articulate. And this is especially true in luxury interiors. High-end spaces aren't successful because everything is special and everything is expensive. You guys have been in those homes where somebody loves Rococo or they love the 18th century, and every piece is from the 18th century, and they're all really gorgeous pieces onto themselves, but then when you bring them all together, it looks like Versailles, but obviously it just doesn't look right. Well, that is exactly the point. I love mixing Rococo pieces. You'll see a Rococo piece in my house with a very modern mirror. You'll see a very simple thing with a very structural side table. This beautiful flower, for example, is gorgeous on a very simple table. This table is, I would say, like a cork. It's an inexpensive table, but the flower itself is so ornate and so beautiful, it balances each other out. They're successful because someone made very clear decisions about what didn't need to be. Plain doesn't mean cheap, guys. It doesn't even mean generic. It means edited. It means the room knows what matters and isn't trying to prove itself. Now, the very last thing I want to talk about is softness, because it changes everything. And this is my final and seventh rule. Every space needs at least one soft element. Now, this is a very fun and subtle rule that a lot of us as interior designers know, but it really changes everything. And when a room feels cold, tense, or overly controlled, it's almost always missing softness. And I don't just mean visually, I mean experientially. Hard materials dominate a space. Stone, wood, metal, they all carry authority and structure, but without something to counterbalance them, the room can start to feel very severe, very cold. So when I'm designing, I'm always thinking about how a room sounds and how it holds light, not just how it looks. Fabric absorbs sound. It diffuses light. It brings in comfort. There's a reason why all of a sudden wall-to-wall carpeting is taking over. People are really looking for that very cocoon-like sheltered space. So when you bring in rugs or when you bring in wall-to-wall carpeting, you are really softening the room. Even one soft element can shift the entire feeling of a room. Imagine you have hardwood floors and you throw on a rug is very different than wall-to-wall carpeting. A rug that grounds the furniture, maybe curtains that soften the edges of the architecture, upholstery that invites you to stay, even a beautiful blanket, I would argue, draped on a chair with beautiful texture and touching the floor brings warmth and softness into the room. This is especially important in more restrained or architectural interiors. Softness is what keeps restraint from tipping into rigidity, and it doesn't need to be excessive. In fact, it works best when it's intentional and measured. The goal isn't coziness for the sake of coziness, it's balance. Softness is what allows a room to feel composed and lived in at the same time, and approachable. I want to end this by explaining the actual shift I hope you take from this. The shift is moving away from thinking about rooms as collections of individual pieces, and instead thinking about them as systems. When I'm designing, I'm never asking, do I like this piece on its own? I'm asking, what job is this piece doing in the room? Is it anchoring the space? Is it supporting something else? Is it creating pause? Is it softening the room? Once you start thinking this way, your entire philosophy of interior design will change. Decorating will become much less overwhelming for you, and instead of constantly adding, you're going to start assigning roles. One piece anchors, one piece leads, a few pieces support. Some pieces stay quiet on purpose. This is why scale, hierarchy, repetition, and restraint really matter. They're not aesthetic preferences. They're not organizational tools. If a room feels unsettled, you can now diagnose it. Is something floating because it hasn't been repeated? Is something too small to do its job? Are too many pieces trying to lead at once? Is the room missing softness? That's the difference between decorating and designing. Designing is deciding what each element is responsible for and letting it do that job fully. If this helped you think about your space more clearly, let me know which of these ideas changed your ethos, your philosophy, your thought process. And I will definitely see you next week on this channel, The Red Elevator.